Hello and welcome to The Truth About How Mass Media and Marketing Sway the American Voter. My name is Chris Berg, and today it is my distinct honor to introduce you to Dr. Sunshine Hillygus. She is the Frederick Danziger Associate Professor of Government and Director of the Program on Survey Research at Harvard University. She received her doctorate in political science from Stanford University and a very well-renowned publisher. She's published several books and papers. One of those books being The Persuadable Voter, Wedge Issues in Presidential Campaigns. Dr. Hillygus, thanks for joining me today.
Well, thank you.
Well, one of the objectives of The Truth About is to help unmask all this marketing and mass media on top of these different issues that obviously make a big impact on people's lives. So what kind of direct relationships have you found out there between the mass media and our voters today? What have you found to be factual and true?
Well, let me give a little bit of background to say that when political scientists often talk about the role of the campaign, that dating back to the earliest research, there's been this skepticism that we can estimate quite accurately exactly how an individual is going to vote, and we do a quite excellent job in predicting the election outcomes long before the campaign gets started. And so given that very basic fact that we can tell you how any one individual is likely to vote, and we can tell you what the election outcomes are likely to be, it seems very difficult to then make a claim that campaigns have some influence. But that was a conventional wisdom that actually, as shown, is not completely accurate. Now, granted, I do want to say that oftentimes journalists and pundits like to assume that the only thing that matters in a campaign is the message of the candidate or the ad buys in a given state, and that's overblown as well. I mean, they have an incentive to say that the only thing that matters is the campaign. The campaign consultants have an incentive to say that their actions make a big difference in the election outcomes and how you'll behave, because it's a billion-dollar industry, campaign consulting. So they have an incentive. And then, of course, the candidates themselves have an incentive to say that the reason they won or lost was because of the campaign. I mean, certainly the losing candidate doesn't want to say, you know, the public was smart, I was just a lousy candidate, and that's why they didn't vote for me. Rather, they say, you know, there was dirty campaigning by my opponent, and that was the reason that I lost. And so whether you're talking about John Kerry blaming it on Swissvote or Bob Dole blaming it on bias in the media, the losing candidate likes to think that it was the campaign. But the reality is that there are constraints on the impact that the media and the campaign can have. And so looking at Bob Dole, for instance, he may have well been a lousy candidate, or he may have been a great candidate. It didn't matter, because there was no candidate that could have been a strong competitor to Clinton in a strong economy in 1996. And so there are very real constraints on the impact of the media and a campaign.
How would you say that these campaigns and or politicians, .org, how are we as the American people being manipulated, if at all, by these campaigns?
Well, and I think that's actually one of the unfortunate parts of, when we think about the campaign is people think that they are concerned, and this is what actually motivated the original research back in the 1920s and 30s about campaigns. Is there was concern that the people could be manipulated. I mean, and actually, if you think about the early research, the context when, in the 40s and during that time is done, there was a bunch of studies done at Columbia about this potential manipulation, about propaganda. But the fact is that most people are smarter than that. The campaign doesn't manipulate people. People have a complex set of considerations that they're going to bring to bear in making up their mind in the campaign. For some people, they might care about, the issues of the economy. They might care about abortion policy. They might care about education. But every person has a diverse set of things that they care about. And what the campaign helps them do is to sort through those, what we call predispositions, and link them to a candidate choice. And what we find is that the campaign absolutely does not manipulate people's predispositions. It doesn't change their mind about their opinions on an issue. Rather, what it does is help them figure out which of those issues is going to have greater weight in making a selection. And so what the candidates try and do is, if the economy advantages them, then they try and prime or emphasize the economy. If the war advantages them, that's what they're going to talk about. If a social issue advantages them, that's what they're going to talk about. And why after the colon in my book, it's the wedge issues in presidential campaigns, there's been an interesting dynamic in American elections in the last few election cycles where we have seen this increasing reliance on divisive wedge issues, things like abortion and gay marriage. I mean, you might recall out of the 2004 election, the great question was, are these moral questions what led the country to support George Bush? And it was quite surprising, actually, that the candidates would be willing to talk about such divisive issues, because you talk about something like abortion and you risk turning off all of those people who disagree with you. And so what we found, though, is that the candidates are using micro-targeting to talk about those issues. They're using micro-targeting through direct mail and email and websites to do dog whistle politics, we call it, where they're sending a message that can be heard by the intended recipient, but not by the wider electorate. And so we did a study of the messages that candidates sent in political direct mail in 2004, and you compare that to what they're talking about in television advertising, and it's a completely different campaign. And the reason is because television advertising, even if you were to try and target it on the Golf Channel or during a news program, you have a very broad audience, and so you don't risk talking about something terribly controversial because it's going to reach people that might disagree with you. But in the direct mail, because it can be targeted to an individual, to a single household, to the one Republican household in a Democratic neighborhood, you're able to get a message that might offend or turn off other people, but you can get it to the right people. And so what we found, for instance, is that less than 1% of television ads made mention of gay marriage, abortion, or stem cell research. And in fact, the only ad that did by the presidential candidates or parties was one that was actually Spanish language, so it was already very narrowly targeted. In contrast, 30% of Bush's direct mail pieces talked about those moral wedge issues. And so what's happening is that by micro-targeting is enabling the candidates to talk about wedge issues, and they talk about wedge issues because they want to pick off those otherwise partisans, right? The Republican Party was sending messages to Democrats that they thought they could pick away on the abortion issue, and the Democrats were sending messages to the Republicans. The Republicans did an especially good job of this, but even the Democrats were sending messages to union members who were otherwise Republican, and trying to pick them off on that issue. And so what we see is that in the direct mail you get a very clean measure of the candidate's strategy, and it's actually worrisome because the candidates took positions on 75 different issues in the direct mail. I mean, there's no way that we're having, remember how I talked about how the campaign serves this kind of democratic function? Well, there's no way that we're having a real dialogue on 75 different issues. Those 75 different issues are being raised to try and, slice away small little, narrow segments of each other's potential coalition.